Judges 20, read by Laura. Then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the area of Gilgal, marched out, and the group assembled as one body in the Lord's presence at Mizpah. The commanders of the people and all of the tribes of Israel took their place in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 foot soldiers armed with swords. And then the Benjaminites got word that the Israelites had marched up to Mizpah. The Israelites inquired, "Tell us how this evil act happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, answered, "My secondary wife and I came to Gilboa of Benjamin to spend the night, and the lead citizen of Gilboa tried to attack me. They surrounded me in the house at night and were determined to kill me. They abused my secondary wife until she died. I took her, chopped her up, and sent her pieces into every part of Israel's territory because they had committed a disgraceful act in Israel. All you Israelites, say what you think should be done here and now." At this, all the people stood as one to say, "Not a single one of us is going home or returning to our house. This is what we're now going to do to Gilboa. We'll march up against it as the lot determines. From all the tribes of Israel, we'll get 10 men for every 100, 100 for every 1,000, and 1,000 for every 10,000 to take supplies for the troops who are going to pay back Gilboa of Benjamin for the disgraceful act they have done in Israel." So all the Israelites joined together and were united as one against the city. The Israelite tribes sent men throughout the whole tribe of Benjamin with this message: "What about this evil act that happened among you? Now hand over those perverse men in Gilboa so that they can execute them and remove the evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites refused to comply with the demand of their own relatives, the Israelites. Instead, the Benjaminites from all cities came together at Gilboa to march out for the battle against the Israelites. On that day, the Benjaminites called up from their cities 26,000 men armed with swords, not counting those living in Gilboa. Out of this entire army, 700 specialty men, chosen men, were left-handed, and every one of those could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Not counting Benjamin, the Israelites called up 400,000 men armed with swords, and every one of them was a trained warrior. Then the Israelites marched up to Bethel to ask for direction from God. They inquired, "Who should go up first to fight against the Benjamites for us?" And the Lord said, "Let the tribe of Judah be first." So the next morning the Israelites got up and camped near Gilboa. They marched out to fight against the Benjaminites, lining up in battle formation against them at Gilboa. But the Benjaminites marched out from Gilboa and cut down 22,000 Israelite men that day. So the Israelites went back up and went before God until evening. They asked the Lord, "Should we move in to fight against our relatives, the Benjaminites?" And the Lord replied, "March out against them." The Israelite troops regrouped and lined up in battle formation again in the same place they had lined up the first day. The Israelites moved in against the Benjaminites the second day, but the Benjaminites marched out of Gilboa to meet them on the second day and cut down another 18,000 Israelite men, all of whom were armed with swords. But then the Israelite troops went back up to Bethel and wept, just sitting there in the Lord's presence. They fasted that whole day until evening. Then they offered entirely burnt offerings and well-being sacrifices to the Lord. Now in these days the chest containing God's covenant was there, and Phinehas, Eliza's son, and Aaron's grandson, was in charge of ministering it before it. The Israelites asked the Lord, "Should we march out once again to fight our relatives, the Benjaminites, or should we give up?" And the Lord replied, "March up, for I'll hand them to you tomorrow." So the Israelites set ambushes around Gilboa. 3 days later, the Israelites marched up against the Benjaminites. They lined up for battle against Gilboa as before. When the Benjaminites came out to meet them, they were drawn away from the city. They began to strike down some of the troops, just like the last time, about 30 Israelites along the main road, one of which goes up to Bethel and one to Gilboa, as well as in the open fields. The Benjaminites thought they were being wiped out before us like the first time, but the Israelites had planned. We'll retreat and draw them away from the city toward the main roads." The Israelites moved from their position and reformed their battle lines at Bel Tamar. Then the Israelites, who had been set in ambush, charged out from their position west of Gilboth. 10,000 specialty chosen men from all the Israelites came against Gilboth. The fight was fierce, and the Benjaminites didn't realize that disaster was almost on them. The Lord wiped out the Benjaminites before Israel. The Israelites slaughtered 25,100 Benjamite men that day, all of them armed with swords. Then the Benjamites saw that they had been defeated. The Israelites had given ground to the Benjaminites because they relied on the ambush they had set around Gilboth. Indeed, those in ambush had dashed swiftly into Gilboth and killed all the people in the city with their swords. The plan between the main force of the Israelites and those in the ambush was that when they set up a big cloud of smoke from the city, the Israelites would turn around in battle. The Benjamites had begun to defeat some of the Israelites and killed about 30 men, thinking they are definitely going to be wiped out before us, as in the first battle. But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, when the Benjaminites looked back, there was an entire city going up in smoke to the sky. The main force of the Israelites turned around, and the Benjamites lost heart, because they recognized that disaster had fallen on them. They turned back before the Israelites in the direction of the desert, but the fighting caught up with them, and those from the town were slaughtered with them there. They encircled the Benjaminites, chased them from Noah, and trampled them to the east of Gilboth. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of whom were strong warriors. When they turned back and fled towards the desert to the rock of Rimmon, the Israelites picked off another 5,000 men on the main roads. And when they caught up with them at Gilman, they struck down 2,000 more. All in all, the total number of Benjamites who fell that day was 25,000 men, all of whom were armed with swords and were strong warriors. 600 men turned back and fled toward the desert to the rock of Rimmon. They stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months, but the Israelites turned their attention to the rest of the Benjamites and massacred them entirely, the city, the people, even the animals, and everything else they found. They also burned down every city they came across.